We are going to listen to Marg, Curnow and Tighe, Instone, who are from New Zealand. We have their recorded testimony, which we are about to run for you. But first, let me introduce you. Tighe was one of the original founders of LAVA, which I remind you that's Lesbian Action for Visibility, Aotearoa, back in 1988. And Marg was the person who set in motion the reforming of LAVA in August 2020. LAVA is committed to fighting for lesbian visibility and sex-based women's rights. They are same-sex attracted, not same-gender attracted, and they reject gender identity as a dangerous ideology that denies the reality of biological sex. See more about LAVA in their website, www.lava.nz. So we are now about to listen to their testimony.
I'm Marg Curnow from LAVA in New Zealand, and I'm here with my friend Tighe Instone, and we're going to talk to you today about sex-based rights in New Zealand, what the current situation is, particularly for lesbians.
And I'm Tighe Instone, and I'm also from LAVA in Wellington, New Zealand, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background of LAVA, Lesbian Action for Visibility in Aotearoa.
Okay, so we began LAVA about 16, 17 months ago, really in response to absolute frustration with what was happening in New Zealand with regard to our rainbow advisory groups. And one day I just had enough with the advice that our groups were giving to government departments. And I thought these groups are supposed to represent lesbians and they're not, and I'm sick of it. And so I put out a call and we had a big Zoom meeting, and we finished up having a meeting in Wellington with around about 20 at our first meeting. So that's how we got together. And then we had to decide what we were going to call ourselves. And someone suggested we should resurrect LAVA. And so we talked to Tighe.
Mm-hmm. And the story of LAVA actually goes back to the 1921 attempt in Britain to include lesbians under the criminal code that covered gay men. And the Lieutenant Maud Brabazon, who said we should ignore them, not notice them, not advertise them. And the Parliament took heed of that and didn't pass the amendment. So, and the story actually is of LAVA revolves around the Human Rights Commission. Now in New Zealand, the Human Rights Commission was set up in 1977. In 1980, the National Gay Rights Coalition applied to be included in the grounds for protection. But the commissioner not only wrote a report suggesting that in actual fact what should be done is lesbians should be included in the criminal code, he approached the Prime Minister and made that recommendation. So we've had a rather rocky time with the Human Rights Commissioner in this country, who I might add told the media that some groups deserve to be discriminated against. And when the Homosexual Law Reform Bill passed in 1985 and decriminalised the activities between gay men, Part 2, which would have provided protection under the Human Rights Commission, failed. So then we get to 1988, and that's when LAVA was formed. And it was formed in response to the government's notification that it was going to introduce a bill to include sexual orientation, disability, which would include people with AIDS, and the elderly in the human rights legislation. But that government didn't survive the next election, and in 1994, it took until for that to happen. But LAVA, because because we were very aware of how visibility and invisibility was used against lesbians, we lobbied, much against lots of people's opinions, for the word lesbian to be included in the bill and not to come under the umbrella of homosexual. And when it passed in 1994, it passed with the wording sexual orientation, which means homosexual, bisexual, lesbian, or heterosexual. We actually lobbied that heterosexual didn't need to be in it, but never mind, because they were the oppressors. But that's how that was LAVA's beginnings. I might add too that then later LAVA had some terrible trouble with in Christchurch we started a lesbian newsletter, and a male to female transsexual wanted to advertise a lesbian support group he identified as a lesbian in our newsletter, and we had a terrible to do with the Human Rights Commission over that. It was never resolved.
So it's been ongoing, hasn't it? The issue, the lesbian visibility has come full circle now. We got protection under the law. We had the word lesbian in the law. Things were okay for a few years, and now we're right back to where we started. And this time we're being made invisible because we're being included under an umbrella that says trans women are women and trans rights matter, and all those other slogans that we're all so familiar with. And the perspective of lesbians is absolutely lost. There is no avenue at all for our perspective to be heard. And that is why we formed, so that a lesbian perspective could be heard and would be heard on matters that affect us and that affect women. So that's the purpose of LAVA Resurrected. And we meet, LAVA meets regularly every month. We're between 15 and 20, sometimes a few more women regularly attend, and we're involved in all sorts of action. We have a wonderful website, thanks to our web mistress, Sabina Schneider. And if any of you want to have a look, it's simply lava.nz. So have a look at our website. It's updated regularly and there's some really good information on it. Okay, so here we are, LAVA, and the situation in New Zealand and the things that we're actually up against. And one of the, excuse me, one of the biggest, as we've alluded to, is the Human Rights Commission, who are redefining the word woman. And of course, other government departments are following their lead now, and they say, well, this is what the Human Rights Commission says. So they're back to doing what they were doing in the 1980s, making us invisible, redefining women, redefining same-sex attraction as same-gender attraction, and so on. And we've had a number of delegations to our current commissioner, which has been a spectacular waste of time in terms of his response. So the main areas of concern in New Zealand at the moment, as we see them, are our parliament. We've just had two major pieces of legislation which are absolutely devastating, following what's happening in the rest of the world. And those of you who are watching this will no doubt be very familiar with them. One is self-sex ID, where now it only takes a simple declaration to say that you are the opposite sex and to have that changed on your birth certificate. And the original birth certificate just disappears, is locked away. We don't even have a clear process for that. And you'll all be very aware of the implications of that. So the same sex self-ID, which was passed unanimously in our parliament. And the other one, which was just passed last night, is the conversion practices bill, which wasn't quite unanimous. We had 7 brave people who spoke up against it, all of course from our more conservative party, the National Party. It's very heartbreaking that all of this is being driven by the left wing. For those of us who are long-time left-wing people, yeah, heartbreaking. So that's where we are legally, and we've got hate speech still on the books and still to come. So that's where we sit with that.
Well, yes. Well, the bill that passed last night, the conversion therapy, which is now an act, had 100,000 submissions and presented to the select committee. And so the most that we've ever had in this country, isn't it? And we actually, some of the MPs were extraordinarily rude to submitters, but not only that, one of them put on her Facebook page a posting saying that she didn't listen to the people that opposed the legislation. So
the whole thing was a farce, wasn't it? You know, people put enormous amounts of energy, and we had some international experts, people with real qualifications and just superb professional presentations, and they were just completely ignored. There was absolutely no notice taken of all of the points made. And in terms of the sex self-ID, there was a much smaller number of submissions because we only had 3 weeks from the time it was announced till when submissions closed, and we were in lockdown. But the same process, they just ridiculed and laughed at people who were presenting. It was just appalling in terms of a lack of democratic process. And that one, there were 70%, weren't there? 70% of submissions were opposed to the legislation. They didn't even put that in their report. So those are two things that are an absolute shame and a blot on our history. And we have a proud history of leading the world in so many things, especially things to do with women. 1893, we were the first country in the world to give women the vote, and now look where we are. We don't even know what a woman is anymore. So, well, some of us do, but our government doesn't, and our public service doesn't. So Parliament's completely captured. Our media is completely captured. It is almost impossible. The public service is completely captured. We have one publication in this country which will put a print publication that will publish gender critical information. And even they, you know, balance it out and all of those things. The others, we don't get a look in, and they regularly are posting stories about the trials and tribulations of being trans, one-sided information. Our statistics department now has gender as the default category when it's gathering data. So anyone who knows even the littlest bit about data knows that this is now meaningless. The data that we are gathering is meaningless because we no longer have sex-based data, and we can't therefore compare any changes, anything that's going on with previous information because it's different criterion. And so that's really very, very serious. Education, we are starting with preschoolers, and certainly in schools, teaching children that they can be born in the wrong bodies, that, you know, boys can have vulvas and girls can have penises, and you can't tell who's a boy and who's a girl just by looking at them. And if you think you're a girl, if you're a little boy who likes to play with, I don't know, likes frilly dresses and playing with dolls, or if you're a little girl who likes, you know, Lego and Meccano, well, that means you're the opposite sex. And it is as basic as that. It's just appalling, regressive 1950s sex role stereotypes. That's what's happening in our education system. And just recently, one of our education groups, which I'm a part of, we sent out a survey to schools simply looking for base data on the number of transgender students. And we finished up all over the news, and schools were told they shouldn't respond to us. And it was just extraordinary, and that we were breaching students' privacy. All we wanted was numbers. So anything that we do gets labelled transphobic. Great label, no explanations, just labels. You're all familiar with that, but it's so bad at the moment here. Yeah.
And we got banned from Massey University, we got banned from the City Council, libraries and town halls, until Speak Up for Women took a case to the High Court and won. And the High Court said that ours was not hate speech, we were entitled to our opinion. And when the Speak Up for Women had the had a meeting in the Michael Fowler Centre, the mayor supported the opposition to it and put the outside lights, floodlit the venue.
In trans colours, pale pink, pale
that's right.
blue.
Yeah, trans colours. Yes.
Oh goodness,
That's unbelievable. And the other thing is corrections. The 6% of the female prison population are trans men.
Trans women.
Trans women, yes. Men, male to female trans, yes. And that's only 6%. We don't know how many others are, because the people that have changed their birth certificates are registered as women. So we actually don't know what the statistics are.
Yeah, and it's just like it's happening everywhere in crime that's reported. You know, there's a huge surge in the number of women committing sexual offences. Because all they have to do is say that they're women, and that's how it's reported, because all it needs is your own say-so. So yeah, it's just appalling. The other area that's really bad is health, and there are two aspects to that. One is our Ministry of Health, which still has on its website that puberty blockers are reversible, fully reversible and harmless, and provide a pause for children, which we all know is not true, and there's an awful lot of evidence against that. We don't have any centralised data around puberty blockers, because there's a number of ways that you can get them through your GP, or you can get them through a specialist, or you can get them through youth clinics. The data is not centralised. They say it doesn't matter and doesn't need to be centralised, but we do know that after getting figures from 1DHB, that there were more children in that city, a small city, than there are in the whole of Ireland receiving puberty blockers. We're dishing them out like lollies, no question about that. There are concerns that a lot of people want to speak out and are too frightened to speak out. People who are speaking out are being hammered by their employers, particularly if they're in the public service. The public service have training for their staff from a group called Inside Out, who have large numbers of government contracts and get huge amounts of government funding to do this training. And they tell people how they must use pronouns and the usual stuff. You all know what it is. We have a woman, a friend of mine, who had already handed in her resignation and so felt safe to ask questions. And she asked a question of the presenters that said, were they saying, therefore, that her lesbian sister should be attracted and open her dating pool to male-bodied people who call themselves lesbians? And she had a mediation meeting, and she had a censoring letter from the Deputy Chief Executive because she used the extremely offensive term male-bodied. So it's unbelievable, and this is what we're up against in this country, and we wonder, how did we get to this? From 1893, when we were the first country in the world where women won the right to vote. That fight was won here first, 1893, and now, as we said,
and the union movement has always been so radical, and yet the PPTA was out there protesting against the Speak Up for Women meeting. It's been completely captured by the gender ideology.
As has the PSA, all of the unions, they've been captured. And so women are no longer being supported. It's time for us to finish off, but the points we wanted to make as part of our conclusion are that there are a number of groups, probably 8 or 9 groups in New Zealand fighting this fight, and we are supporting each other, but at this stage there is no sort of umbrella group, connecting group, but we are working on that. But those groups are supporting each other. We have a fabulous LAVA website, lava, lava.nz, which you can look at and which is updated regularly, weekly, by our fabulous webmistress, Sabina Schneider. So those are really important things. And Tighe's got one final thing to say.
Well, yes, I do. There's one thing which is extraordinarily difficult that we're up against in this country, is that the mainstream media are so reluctant to cover either. So most people in the country don't even know what has happened and what is happening, and when you go out and talk about it to people, that they sometimes think that we're a bit mad.
Yes, it's
They'd
true.
never do that. They'd never do that, they say.
Yes, they've got no idea, and that's our big challenge.
Mm.
Thank you all. It's been great talking to you.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yeah.